I'm nearly 68 years old now, and I've come to a point in my life when I feel that I need to finalize my views about God. And this is a topic I've been thinking about since high school. And I should say that my views about God and religion keep evolving. And I approach this subject not even pretending to know base reality. And I'm going to break this video series down into 4 areas. And these areas might expand over time. Number one, can we know if God exists? Number two, if God exists, does he care about us as individuals? Or is he just some remote, distant clockmaker who really doesn't care about us at all? Three, is there an afterlife? And number four, why I've concluded that Christianity is probably the best expression of the truth and of reality that we have. And what attracts me to Christianity over any other religion is the civilization that it produced. Western civilization, the most successful civilization in history. By their fruits you shall know them, Jesus said. Christianity gave us respect for individual rights because of the Christian understanding that God cares about us as individuals. He cares about us personally. And this value that God places on individuals in the Christian understanding really puts us above the state in terms of importance, in terms of value, because God saves individual souls, doesn't save governments. It therefore becomes government's job to protect the individual. Government's purpose is to benefit individuals, to benefit people. It's not the purpose of individuals, it's not the purpose of people to benefit the state. The state is an institution that is supposed to protect us as individuals. And that's the big difference between Western civilization and other civilizations. By contrast, Judaism, for example, emphasizes the group, God's chosen people. In the Old Testament, God had a covenant with this group of people. But in Christianity, God has a covenant with us as individuals. Doesn't matter what race you are, what color you are, what tribe you're part of. In Christianity, you have a personal relationship with God, not as part of a group. And I don't think most Americans would want to live under Islam, especially the stricter versions of it, the more radical versions of it, such as in Iran or under the Taliban in Afghanistan or under ISIS or Al Qaeda. I'll probably get into Buddhism a bit more later. I actually like Buddhism quite a bit, but I think it's basically too pacifistic. Buddhists tend to be conquered by more aggressive ideologies, such as communism or Imperial Japan. Half of Wanda's family is Buddhist, the other half Catholic. But especially no thanks on Islam as being the religion for me. By their fruits you shall know them. And the fruits overall are not great with Islam. I would say almost as bad as communism in terms of the results for civilization. And Hinduism doesn't seem to have worked for India, for whatever reason. Hinduism has produced pretty much economic misery for generations in India, with its religious-based caste system, pantheism, and generally fatalistic outlook on life. Only in recent decades has India made strides toward becoming a modern country, as the desire for prosperity has started to triumph over Hinduism and the caste system. India is starting to do a lot better economically despite Hinduism. And when liberated from the Hindu caste system, immigrants from India to America are actually now the most successful immigrant group. Immigrants from India to America now have a median household income of about $150,000, compared to $112,000 for Asian immigrants to America, and $89,000 for white Americans. So immigrants from India are doing better than white Americans. So the actual results produced by the dominant religion of a civilization or a country is a huge factor for me. And the word culture actually comes from the word cult, which means religion. And culture is an expression of the dominant religion. And if the culture produced by the dominant religion always brings with it misery, always produces misery, then obviously there is something wrong with that religion. And I actually wrote a book on this theme titled Faith and Freedom, The Christian Roots of American Liberty. It was a bestseller when it came out in the 1980s. It's out of print now, so I'm going to republish it soon along with my other books that have gone out of print. The big point that that book made is that Christian civilization has produced superior results in terms of economic prosperity and respect for individual rights. So, my primary reason for settling on Christianity as the religion for me is the civilization that Christianity produced. If Christianity had just spread misery everywhere, I would not have been interested. And the more I studied Christianity, the more interested I became in it. So let's start with the first question. Does God exist at all? Can we know whether he exists or not? This is a question the smartest minds in the world have wrestled with for thousands of years. If God exists, how do we get in touch with him? How do we find out what he's thinking? So I'll quote here two of the smartest people who have ever lived, Aristotle and Albert Einstein, on this question. Now, I said that Christianity gave us Western civilization, but we also needed Aristotle's logic, Aristotelian logic, which influenced the building of the Roman Empire. Without logic, we can't have engineering, science, or a system of laws that make sense. So, Aristotelian logic, Aristotle's logic, is crucial to the development of Western civilization. So, Aristotle was super smart. What did he say about the existence of God? Aristotle lived in Greece about 350 years before Christ. And Aristotle argued that everything in motion, everything that changes or that is in movement, must be caused by something else, cause and effect. He also argued that this chain of causes and effect cannot regress infinitely, as an infinite regress lacks a starting point and fails to explain motion in the first place. Therefore, there must be some other type of first cause. And he arrived at the unmoved mover, some immaterial force out there that is eternal and that initiates motion without itself moving. And this unmoved mover is pure actuality, no potentiality. And it's the ultimate source for all motion, for all change. Therefore, there must be a first cause, which he called an unmoved mover, an eternal, non material entity that initiates all motion without itself being moved. This unmoved mover is pure actuality, no potentiality, and it's the ultimate source of all motion and all change. In other words, logic, according to Aristotle, dictates that this unmoved mover had to be non material, pure actuality, and the ultimate source of all motion. Non materiality is the only way for it to be eternal, according to Aristotle. And Aristotle was arguably the smartest man who ever lived. Now, Aristotle did not believe in a personal God the way Christians do. He arrived at the necessity for God through rigorous use of logic. And he concluded through use of logic that this God would have to be an immaterial, unmoved mover. And Aristotle's use of logic powered advances in science, engineering, and math. And combined with Christianity's focus on the value of the individual, this produced Western civilization. And indeed, St. Thomas Aquinas explicitly used Aristotelian logic to argue for the truth of Christianity. Thomas Aquinas did this over the course of 50 volumes of writing. And that's another aspect of Christianity that attracts me. Its truth or its falsehood has been put through a rigorous logic test, through Aristotelian logic, most notably through the works of St. Thomas Aquinas. The same cannot be said of other religions, with the exception of Judaism, which is part of Christianity. Christians believe that Christianity, the New Testament, completes Judaism. It's the end of the story. It's the final chapter. And Jesus Christ, of course, was a Jew. He was a rabbi. Now, I think we all agree that Albert Einstein is among the smartest people who ever lived. He's the most prominent scientific thinker and mathematician who has ever lived. Here's what Einstein said about his views on God. Quote, "The more I study science, the more I believe in God." Unquote. Or quote, "I want to know how God created this world. I want to know his thoughts." End quote. And here's more Einstein, quote, "If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is my unbounded admiration for the structure of the world." End quote. Einstein, quote, "What really interests me is whether God had any choice in the creation of the world." End quote. Or quote, "God does not play dice with the universe." End quote. Or Einstein, quote, "My religion consists of a humble admiration for the illimitable superior spirit." End quote. Or Einstein, quote, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind, end quote. So science without religion is lame, thought Einstein. In other words, Albert Einstein believed that there is an intelligent designer behind the universe. There is a creator. Now, similar to Aristotle, he didn't believe in a personal God who cares about us as individuals, but he definitely believed in a creator, in God. So, two of the smartest humans who have ever lived believed in God. And this aligns perfectly with what the Bible tells us. God's invisible qualities have been clearly seen, so that people are without excuse. End quote. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. In other words, all we have to do is look up at the stars at night, look at the world all around us, and we can see intelligent design. We can see that there is a creator of the creation. Can't have a creation without a creator. So we are therefore without excuse if we disbelieve in God. I also think that people just inherently, instinctively want to be thankful for this gift that we've been given called life. It's just part of our nature to want to thank somebody for this. And probably 98% of people who have ever lived have believed in God because it's so obvious. If you see a painting that's hanging on someone's wall, you assume that someone must have painted that. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. So I think I'll side with the smartest people who have ever lived, with Aristotle, with Einstein, with Thomas Aquinas, with almost all philosophers, probably 95% of philosophers who have ever lived throughout history, with the Bible, with 98% of the population who've believed in God, believed in some kind of a God, a creator. So this is an argument from intelligent design of everything we see around us, of creation, of the world, of life, plus an argument from authority. I do like to listen to the smartest people in the world, the smartest people who have ever lived. And they've concluded that there is a God. Now, you might call this a leap of faith, and it is I would say, a small leap of faith, but it's a much smaller leap of faith than to believe that there can be a creation without a creator, that there can be a painting hanging on the wall with no artist who has painted that painting. And the more we look at existence and life and consciousness, the more miraculous it appears. Let's look at the design. The design requires intelligence. For example, if the Earth was 5% closer to the Sun, it would be 460 degrees centigrade on the Earth's surfaces, or 860 degrees Fahrenheit. But if just 5% farther away from the Sun, the Earth would be minus 65 degrees centigrade, or minus 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Or if Earth was just 10% smaller, the gravity would be too weak to hold the atmosphere. But if 10% larger, gravity would crush complex life. Or how about Earth's magnetic field, which deflects solar wind and cosmic radiation? Without the magnetic field, radiation would strip the atmosphere from the planet, so there could be no life. And for a planet to have the required magnetic field, we need to have a very specific core composition, plus a planetary rotation rate of 24 hours per day. Earth's magnetic field is like a shield keeping deadly solar rays at bay. Without it, we'd be zapped by the sun like gnats hitting an electric insect zapper. And how about the Earth's atmospheric composition? Well, let's see. Earth's atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% other gases. It's the perfect composition for life. Oxygen is needed for metabolism, nitrogen dilutes it, and CO2 feeds plants and prevents freezing. And the precise balance is critical. Too much CO2 and you get too much atmosphere, which causes runaway heating like in Venus, too much greenhouse effect. Too little CO2 and all the plants die. We also get zapped by the sun, or we freeze to death at night. No temperature moderation. We also just happen to have the perfect sun, a G-type main sequence star, which has a stable heat output, which varies less than 0.1%. And any variance in the sun's heat output wipes out life. Most stars do not have a stable heat output. Most have massive heat variance, massive radiation variance. A star slightly bigger is no good. A star slightly smaller is no good. We also have to be the exact right distance from the sun. And we're very lucky to have such a large moon, which stabilizes the Earth's tilt. the tilt the Earth has on its axis. Without the moon, we would have extreme temperature and climate swings, making Earth uninhabitable. We could also not exist without Jupiter, a giant planet whose massive gravity acts as a cosmic shield, protecting Earth from being bombarded with comets and asteroids. Imagine nuclear level bombs going off all the time here on the Earth's surface. Jupiter prevents that from happening. Earth also happens to have the exact right amount of volcanic activity that keeps temperatures stable and creates land to live on. Without volcanic activity, without just the right amount of volcanic activity, CO2 would deplete and life would end. Or if we have too much volcanic activity, we'd get too much CO2. We also just happen to have the exact right amount of water on Earth. Earth has 71% surface water. Too little water obviously prevents life, too much, and there's no place for humans to live. We also have the perfect amount of gravity to sustain life. Earth rotates at exactly the right rate, is the exact right distance from the sun, and is the exact right size. Has the exact right type of sun and the right size sun. Change anything just a hair and all life goes away. Life never starts. And this complexity of the design becomes even more insane the more we go down into the molecular and atomic level. Then add in the structure of life itself, DNA, cellular structure, and the laws of physics. We don't even know where gravity comes from. We know it's related to mass somehow. Without this invisible force called gravity, nothing would work. We wouldn't have a universe. And where does energy come from? No one knows that either. Where does matter come from? Well, we know that energy transforms into matter and can, under the exact right conditions, transform into single cell life. That is, if conditions are exactly perfect, and eventually become more complex life if conditions are exactly perfect and stay perfect over a long period of time. It's almost as if there's this insanely brilliant clockmaker or video game maker behind it all. And there are these enormously powerful invisible forces that we can't see called gravity and energy. And many just assume that life is common throughout the universe. After all, there are 100 to 400 billion stars in just our little galaxy, the Milky Way, but there are approximately 2 trillion galaxies out there in the known universe. So there has to be more life out there, right? But the big mystery is, why haven't we seen any of it? Why haven't we run into any of it? Why hasn't any of this life found us? You would think that if evolution works the way we're told, that there would be more civilizations out there that are far more advanced than us, more evolved than us, that would be traveling at the speed of light. And you'd think we would have encountered something, seen something in a telescope, but so far nothing. Now, Elon Musk is pretty smart, right? Most people think he's probably one of the smartest people in the world. He has the mind of an engineer. He's famous for thinking from first principles. As a private individual, he's built the biggest space exploration program on Earth. 90% of the rockets being launched into space from Earth's surface are being launched by Elon Musk and his company, SpaceX. He invented reusable rockets, which no one thought possible, which drove the cost of launching rockets into space down by 90%. And Elon says that his mission is to ensure that human consciousness extends beyond Earth's lifespan because he believes that human consciousness might be the only consciousness in the universe. Elon is pretty smart. I think we all agree on that. I like to listen to smart people like Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Einstein, and Elon. And Elon believes that it's quite likely that there is no other life in the universe. We might be it. Here's what Elon says about this quote, "There are probably no aliens." And I think that's kind of scary, actually, because then that would suggest that consciousness is extremely rare and a very precious thing, where our consciousness is like a small candle in a vast darkness, and we must not let that small candle go out. End quote. Furthermore, Elon says, quote, "The scariest answer to the Fermi paradox is that there are no aliens at all," end quote. And the Fermi paradox is the apparent contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life in this vast universe and the lack of evidence for it. or any contact with such civilizations that we would expect in such an enormous universe of 2 trillion galaxies. And this Fermi paradox is named after the physicist Enrico Fermi, who asked the question, quote, where is everybody? We've landed unmanned spacecraft on Mars and could find no sign of life, no sign that life ever existed, not so much as a spore, zip, zero, nada. Now, this is my theory, and it's just a theory. I think that space and time might be an illusion. Albert Einstein, after all, taught us that space and time are relative, warped by mass and speed, E equals mc squared. The faster we travel, the slower time passes, especially as we approach the speed of light. And we don't know what happens to time if we find a way to exceed the speed of light. And since time itself changes with speed, and since space is warped by mass, stars, planets, galaxies, and so on, Einstein's E equals mc squared equation suggests to me that space and time might be an illusion, perhaps a simulation. One reason that we might not see life everywhere in the universe, if it's a simulation, if we're living in a computer simulation, in a computer game essentially, is that it would require too much compute power to have life everywhere. Now, obviously, this is just speculation. I thought it was pretty funny when I heard it, but when you really think about it, it makes quite a bit of sense. The idea that we might be living in something like a giant video game, space might be an illusion. We might be living in something sort of like the Truman Show, a very funny movie, by the way. So I do think simulation theory is actually very interesting. And I do think it's kind of helpful in understanding how reality might be. After all, the universe does require a lot of energy. Computers, especially now that we have to power AI, also require a lot of energy. And the more we see what AI is capable of and how AI is becoming less and less distinguishable from real humans, and how we're just at the beginning, infant stages of AI. And at what point does AI begin to develop true consciousness and self awareness, including the will to survive? At what point does AI actually become indistinguishable from humans? We might actually be very advanced AI, which fits simulation theory. And this is not at all incompatible with Christianity, at least in my view. Now, I certainly don't know the universe's true nature. No one does. We don't know what base reality is because we can't access it at this point. But it certainly seems clear that there is a vast intelligence behind it all. Skeptics of religion argue that we're just a tiny speck on the edge of the Milky Way, a tiny galaxy among 2 trillion other galaxies. So why would we think that God would care about us, this tiny speck in this vast, just insanely vast universe? My son asked me this question when he was 8, when he found out exactly where we were in the Milky Way and how big the universe is. In fact, he said, hey, Dad, here's the Milky Way, and our planet is located here, kind of on the edge of the Milky Way, on one of these little wispy spokes out here. And there are 2 trillion galaxies out there. If God is out there, why do we think he cares about us? My son asked me this when he was 8. And at about that time, I introduced my son, 8 years old, to Robert Jastrow, Dr. Robert Jastrow, who had been a professor of mine at Dartmouth College. Jastrow was also the founder of NASA's Goddard Space Institute. Jastrow was one of the most preeminent physicists of our lifetime. He wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. Great book, by the way. I took all of his courses at Dartmouth. I was so fascinated in the subject. I actually got A's in all of them, even though I wasn't a science major. I was an English literature major. He wanted me to enter the field of physics, but I stayed an English literature major. Anyways, I was watching my 8-year-old son discuss these issues for hours with Dr. Jastrow. We were at a party at the Yale Club in New York City. And Robert Jastrow, this giant mind, this preeminent physicist of our lifetime, chose to spend his entire time at that party sitting and talking with my 8-year-old son in the corner. They're just sitting there on chairs in a corner. And the topic apparently was the immense size of the universe. And given that we're such a tiny speck in this universe, how can there be a God who cares about us as individuals? Our problems must seem really small to God. And this topic really did depress my son for years. However, I think I might have helped overcome this objection by pointing out that Albert Einstein taught us that space and time are relative, are not fixed. Time changes with speed. Space is warped and changes with mass. So space and time might not even be real or might not be what we think they are. We can only see this thing we call space and time from our perspective. In other words, we know so little, we know almost nothing. But whatever the base nature of reality is, I think we can conclude quite safely that there is a vast intelligence behind it. I also discussed these questions extensively with Dr. Robert Jastrow over the decades until his death in 2008. He definitely believed in God, believed in a creator, believed in a great designer behind the universe. He just was not convinced that there is a personal God. So then, what about this unmoved mover that Aristotle talked about? I also talked about this with Robert Jastrow, and I theorized that Aristotle's unmoved mover might be energy. We can't see energy, like electric power, but we know that it has tremendous power despite being invisible. And it doesn't move, it's just power. If you've ever touched an electric horse fence, you know that there's a lot of power in this invisible force called electricity, even though the fence is only electrified, typically with a 6-volt battery. Energy is an incredible invisible force that transforms into matter, atoms, electrons, protons, and animates all things. And all energy in the universe is connected, from the Big Bang to the stars. All energy in the universe is connected. It's a single force holding everything together and powering everything, the entire universe. So it could be that God is energy, animating the universe, which would explain how God can be everywhere. Or energy might be a manifestation of God's power. Energy is an invisible, unmoved force, fitting Aristotle's description of an unmoved mover perfectly. We then infer intelligence behind it from the intricate design of the universe and intelligent life here on Earth. I posited this theory many times to Robert Jastrow. He thought it had a lot of merit. So then the big question is, does God care about us as individuals? That's really the big question. I mean, who cares if there's a God if he doesn't care about us, right? And the short answer is that it's hard to imagine the personal being created by the impersonal. C.S. Lewis and the renowned geneticist Francis Collins, Dr. Francis Collins, have said that it is hard to imagine our personal consciousness, our ability to think and feel, coming from an impersonal, random universe. And Dr. Francis Collins' book, came out in 2006, is titled The Language of God: A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief. And it's a terrific book. Dr. Collins is pretty smart. He sequenced the genome, and he wrote that one can think of DNA as the instructional script, a software program sitting in the nucleus of the cell. And DNA, God's instruction manual for life, creates individual humans with their own consciousness and self awareness, with thoughts, feelings, aspirations, a desire for relationships with others. And it's Christian doctrine that God created humans in order to have a personal relationship with us. He wants company and fellowship with us, basically. That's why God came to earth in the form of Jesus Christ, in the form of a human. And as I said, I'm primarily attracted to Christianity by its fruits, by its results. It produced Western civilization with help from the ancient Greeks and Romans. And according to Christianity, God loves us as individuals, actually wants a personal relationship with us as individuals. And this doctrine produced a respect for individual rights. In fact, our country, the United States of America, was founded on this creed, on this principle, that our rights are inalienable because they come from God and are not granted by the state, not granted by government. Our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, states, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And this idea comes from Christianity, no other religion, that the individual is what's most valuable, the individual soul. And the United States of America expressed this idea in political form as our creed of governance. The role of government is to secure these rights of individuals, and to protect the rights of individuals from being trampled on by the collective, by the group. So this is the opposite of communism, Nazism, and other forms of collectivism, whether ancient Egypt, the Aztecs, or the Romans. The Romans did build an impressive empire and civilization with legal systems like the 12 tables and roads that spread learning, including Christianity in the latter days of the latter period of the Roman Empire. But universal individual rights were not a Roman concept. Their society valued status, social hierarchy, and the power of the state over the individual. So that's what impresses me about Christianity, its emphasis on the value of the individual person, and that result being Western civilization, freedom, prosperity, and technological progress. As Jesus said, by their fruits you shall know them. So then you might say, well, that's all well and good. Christianity has worked, actually worked better than any other religion or ideology ever tried, in a practical sense, to create a better life and a better world, better conditions for people. But is Christianity actually true? So we'll look into evidence on this question in future episodes. That is, if you want to hear more from me on this topic. And my plan with this series is to address objections to religion and to Christianity in particular by some of the more famous atheists out there, like Bill Maher or the late Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. I was actually pretty good friends with Christopher Hitchens. I liked Christopher Hitchens a lot. He was an atheist and a socialist writer for The Nation magazine. He moved more right following the 9/11 attack on America. We still didn't agree on a lot of things, but he was very pro-life and he believed that civilization has to be defended. Hitchens was a complex person, a brilliant guy, a terrific writer and polemicist. He died of cancer in 2011 and seemed to stay true to his atheist beliefs until the end. And my longtime friend Dinesh D'Souza had a number of great debates on the existence of God and the truth of Christianity with Christopher Hitchens, which you can find on YouTube, well worth listening to. And what Hitchens' critique of Christianity focused on most was events like the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, church corruption, the Salem witch trials, evil corrupt popes, child molesting priests, and things like that. But Christianity actually contains the answer for all that in its doctrine. Humans, including Christians, are prone to corruption and falling into evil. The spiritual battle that we see raging in the world between good and evil is real. The battle between good and evil rages not just in the physical world, but in our hearts. And this is really the entire point and reason for Jesus Christ. If we were not a fallen people and prone to corruption and evil, there would be no need for Jesus Christ. We'd all still be living in the Garden of Eden. And we'll get into this as we go through this series, assuming that you want to hear more from me on this topic. Or have you heard enough? Please let me know in the comments, and please share your views on this. I certainly don't pretend to know all the answers. I just give you my opinions and my thoughts, which are constantly evolving. And I get lots of ideas from reading your comments. And please be sure to like, subscribe, share, and hit the notifications button. That's how we overcome suppression by the algorithm, because the suppression is real. Without notifications, that is, if you don't hit the notifications button, YouTube might never again remind you in your feed that I've put out another video. So you might never again see another video of mine if you don't hit the notifications button. So please do that. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you back here next time.